Why each of these deaths in Invincible was needed. Guardians of the Globe. One massacre that had 1,000 consequences and every single one was needed. The Guardians were Earth's answer to everything. They got a mysterious distress call to their own HQ. They show up and are confused. They're looking at each other asking who sent it. And then Omni-Man just starts killing them. But in minutes they are just a pile of bodies on a slaughterhouse floor. Heads crushed and bodies broken. And the man who did it was their own teammate. This massacre had to happen because it ripped away the story's safety net. Before this, you could believe someone would always save the day. The Guardians were that someone. In this world, raw power is the only thing that matters. The biggest consequence was that it left Mark Grayson completely alone. Overnight, a kid who could barely punch became Earth's only hope. No mentors, no backup, no big guys to call. Just a teenager realizing the weight of the entire world was now on his shoulders. But while Mark lost his teachers, Robot lost his rules. As long as the Guardians were alive, Robot had a ceiling. He was just a tech guy because the adults were in charge. The second they died, a power vacuum opened up, and Robot was the only one smart enough to see how he could fill it. The Guardians didn't die to prove Omni-Man was powerful, they died to prove that power, in this universe, is terrifying and absolute, and nobody, not even the people with the capes and code names and decades of experience, are guaranteed to be okay. And this is what makes it different. Splode. He was the guy you were supposed to hate, and then he made you feel guilty for ever hating him. He was the guy you hated because he was a cheater, arrogant, and an absolute jerk to Mark and Eve. He was just a cocky kid hiding a lot of insecurity. In the beginning, you really couldn't stand him. Then the Invincible war hit. A bunch of evil versions of Mark Grayson attacked the Earth all at once. Everything was burning. The heroes were losing, and one of those evil Marks was about to level everything. Rex looked at the situation, looked at his friends, and made a choice. He didn't use a weapon, he became a weapon. His power was making things explode. So to stop the threat, he detonated his own body. That death finished his arc. He went from a selfish kid who couldn't commit to anything to a man who made the ultimate sacrifice. He stopped calculating what was in it for him and just gave everything he had left. And the saddest part is that he died for a world that didn't even like him. He wasn't a beloved hero. When he went out, he was just a complicated guy who finally did the right thing. Conquest, the purest Viltrumite. While Nolan tried to justify the Empire as a peaceful order, Conquest is the truth of that empire. When he showed up on Earth, he basically tried to tear Mark's entire world apart. And honestly, Mark got destroyed. Conquest beat him within an inch of his life. He punched a hole right through Eve, and that was a catalyst for something inside Mark. He tapped into this rage he didn't even know he had, and strangled Conquest to death with his bare hands. Why did this have to happen? Because it forced Mark to answer a question he'd been avoiding for years. Is there a situation where you don't have any other option? This also changed everything for the finale because Mark actually killed a general as high-ranking as Conquest. It proved to Thragg that he was a real problem. That one fight is the reason Thragg eventually goes after Mark's family. But the most fascinating part of Conquest's narrative isn't just the monster we see, it's the man he could have been. In the vast multiverse, there exists a version of this butcher known as Quest. He's defined by a simple statement from the series: I am so happy. This version explores the what-if scenario where the same empathy that changed Nolan reached Conquest. When evil Mark exists, Conquest is a peaceful, middle-aged dad figure living in the mountains of Utah, with his dogs known as Quest. This man has traded planetary invasion for a calm, retired life. Even as a peaceful man though, Carl's biology remains Viltrumite. He doesn't hunt or kill, but he still buys raw cow hearts from the butcher to satisfy his primal needs. Thaedus. His death proved that wisdom alone cannot win a war. The founder of the Coalition of Planets and the leader of the resistance to Viltrumite expansion in the known universe. He was the man who created the Scourge virus, a biological weapon that wiped out 99% of the Viltrumite race thousands of years before the main story event begins. The leader of the Coalition is the same man who committed genocide against the Viltrumites. He spent thousands of years building something new out of the wreckage of the worst thing he ever did. The Coalition of Planets, in some sense, is his penance. During the Viltrumite War, Thragg found him and decapitated him. His death was needed for two reasons. One, it forced Alan to become a leader. Two, the universal law. So Alan is a great guy. He's passionate, but he's not a cold-blooded strategist. He was a soldier forced to be a king because he actually deserved the seat more. Unlike Thaedus, who had become ruthless, Alan still carried the morals of humanity and kindness. He wasn't as easily ready to commit genocide. even though he almost got convinced to do it once with the Scourge virus. But he was also easily convinced out of it by Mark. You could reason with him. And he had a backbone too. He stood up to the directors and elders of the coalition when they were trying to push him to their agenda. And he was also physically very strong. The second reason, Thaedus represented the death of secrets. His darkest act was the genocide of his own species that could no longer be justified or managed by the man who committed it. The past came loose, and the universe had to reckon with it without him there to explain it. His death didn't just remove a character, it de-established the entire moral compass of the coalition. Oliver Grayson. What happens when you're half Viltrumite, half Thraxan, raised by a human woman, and none of those things fully explain who you are? Oliver is one of the most underrated characters. And the reason people underrate him is because when he was introduced, he seemed like he's there to create tension just for Mark. He genuinely believed that killing villains was efficient. Why send a murderer back to prison when you can end the threat permanently? He killed the Mauler twins without hesitation. Mark was horrified. They were speaking completely different moral languages. Oliver eventually became a double agent, appearing to serve Thragg, while secretly feeding intelligence to Alan and the Coalition. When Thragg moved to assassinate Mark's family, Oliver actually stepped in to protect his niece, Tara. He knew he couldn't win. Thragg drove his hand straight through Oliver's chest. And why was this death important? Because it completed the thesis of the entire Grayson bloodline. The whole arc of this family is about choosing love over the Viltrumite doctrine of strength. Nolan chose it, Mark chose it, and Oliver proved it. He sacrificed himself for a niece he had only recently learned to prioritize over his mission. And his death becomes the emotional fuel that sends Mark into the final war with Thragg. Not any strategy or duty, but pure grief. That's what Kirkman wanted Mark fighting that last battle with. From a broken place, not a tactical one. Battle Beast. He was the strongest warrior in the entire universe, and he died in the best way he would have ever wanted. Battle Beast, or Thok, was a walking force of nature, arguably stronger than Mark, Nolan, and possibly, maybe even Thragg himself. He'd beaten Mark. He'd beaten entire armies. The most physically dangerous being in the known universe, and he knew it, and was bored by it, because there was nobody left who could give him what he actually wanted. He didn't care about conquest or ideology. He lived for one thing: the experience of fighting someone stronger than him. Thragg gave him that. Their battle lasted days across a dying planet, with two beings at the absolute peak of physical evolution, and neither one being able to end it quickly. Thragg finally won, and then he wore Battle Beast's pelt as a trophy. That death sent shockwaves through the entire coalition of planets. When Thragg kills the strongest being in the universe and literally wears his skin, the message is unmistakable. This isn't just winning a fight, it's absorbing a legend. He became proof that no one was beyond his reach. This single death pushed Alan over the edge. It forced him to stop thinking like a general and start thinking like someone with nothing left to lose. That desperation is what led Alan to authorize the Scourge virus, a decision that would have horrified the idealist he used to be. Nolan Grayson. He had one of the greatest redemption arcs in the story. And let's be very honest about what Nolan Grayson was at the start of the story. A traitor. On both sides. Why was his death needed? The story began with Nolan as the Invincible one, the man no force on Earth could touch. His death is a story completing its full circle from untouchable alien conqueror to exile to father to king to a man who dies in his son's arms, having given the galaxy something worth living in. The passing of the torch, not as a burden but as a mission. That's the difference between a superhero story and a human one. And Debbie Grayson outlives him, having forgiven him, spending the rest of her natural human life helping raise Mark's daughter, Tara, and later his son, Marky. In a universe full of impossible things, that quiet human forgiveness might be the most extraordinary thing in the entire series. Thragg, the most powerful Viltrumite who ever lived, and he died, the only place powerful enough to hold him. He was the Empire. The impact of Thragg's death was the literal and symbolic burning of the old Viltrumite Empire. The final battle between Mark and Thragg ended in freefall through space. Mark grabbed Thragg, Thragg grabbed Mark, and Mark dragged them both into the sun. They burned together. Thragg died. Mark survived barely with the help of Alan, the alien. It was symbolic because Thragg was the old Viltrum conquest of strength, the doctrine that might is the only morality. By dragging him into the sun, Mark didn't just defeat him, he incinerated the ideology along with the man. The peaceful Viltrumite Empire couldn't begin until the last living symbol of brutal strength was ash. So the phoenix of kinder morals could rise from the ashes. Emperor Mark. Angstrom Levy, the most morally uncomfortable death in the series. He didn't die at the hands of his nemesis, he died as collateral damage in a friend's betrayal. He never even got to see Mark one last time, a man who genuinely blamed Mark for the accident that turned him into a monster. He wasn't wrong that Mark was responsible for what happened to him, but by the time of his actual death, Angstrom had moved toward redemption. He was no longer the villain he had been. The impact of Angstrom's death was that it was Robot's absolute point of no return. He's no longer a hero making difficult choices. He's a villain who killed a reformed man and betrayed his best ally to serve his own agenda. Mark Grayson. He didn't die, but something inside him did. During the Invincible War, Mark's body survives. His name survives. His face survives. But the version of Mark who went into that war doesn't come out the other side. Mark had to fight his own face, over and over. He had to kill versions of himself, literally, not evolution. He had to stand in the wreckage and see cities destroyed by his own hands, his own powers and his name. And then, the moment that actually killed something in him, he found out what Cecil Stedman did with the corpses of the evil Marks afterwards. Cecil had D.A. Sinclair turn them into reanimate, mindless robotic soldiers built on the dead bodies of alternate Marks wearing his dead eyes. Mark looked at his own corpses and machines, his own dead eyes open, empty, plugged into weapons, and he felt nothing. That nothingness is death. Up until the Invincible War, Mark carried a specific kind of moral clarity. He was better than Cecil because he cared, better than Nolan because he didn't compromise, and had a clean conscience, and he wore it like an identity. After the war, that is gone. He understands now that the only difference between him and the evil Marks wasn't power or heart. It was a circumstance. It was a specific combination of people who loved him, and the choices that happened to go one way instead of the other. The line between hero and weapon is thinner than anyone wants to admit. Here, there's no wall. There is no screaming. There's just a terrible, quiet agreement. He looks at his own dead eyes and accepts what they mean. That acceptance and willingness to sit with the horror without flinching is what eventually allows him to lead the Viltrumites, make the hard calls, and survive the costs of the final arc. Cecil Stedman. He was the system, and when he died, everything fell apart, or so we thought. He was literally the most dangerous human in the Invincible universe, and not because of any power, but because of information. He knew where everybody was buried, including the ones he buried himself in. He understood Mark better than almost anyone else. He spent years building contingency plans to kill him if Mark ever turned out to be like his father. He weaponized D.A. Sinclair's horrific reanimate technology, turning dead bodies into cyborg weapons because it was strategically useful. He made deals that would turn your stomach. Mark comes back from an alternate dimension with evidence of Robot's plans to take over the world. Robot, realizing the game is up, slits Cecil's throat, and then stomps on his head until it's crushed. Robot kills Cecil because Cecil was too smart and too capable to exist in Robot's new world order. The impact of his death was that it wasn't just the death of a man, it was the death of accountability. With Cecil gone, there was nobody left who had the intelligence, resources, and ruthless pragmatism to check Robot's power. The era of flawed but functional secret government was over, and the era of efficient but soulless global dictatorship begun. And it forced Mark to leave Earth entirely. He couldn't win a political war against Robot, so he abandoned his home and the story entered its darkest chapter. Dinosaurus. He killed millions to save billions. And the math actually worked, which was terrifying. Dinosaurus is the what-if character of Invincible. What if a hero stopped worrying about collateral damage and just fixed the problem? He killed millions to reverse climate change. He flooded cities to rebuild them better. He had a logic to everything. A cold, utilitarian, genuinely defensible logic, and it worked. And Mark let him operate for a while because deep down Mark was tempted. What if you could just fix it? What if the math actually added up? It didn't. Mark had to kill Dinosaurus himself. And it was the final permanent break between Mark and Cecil the moment Mark proved that he couldn't outsource his morality to someone else's math. The impact of Dinosaurus' death was that it forced Mark to answer the series' most dangerous question. Is it okay to kill millions if you save billions? The answer, or his answer, was no. And choosing that answer cost him enormously. Killing Dinosaurus wasn't just ending a villain, it was Mark choosing what kind of man he was going to be, at an enormous personal cost. Adam Eve. Adam Eve didn't choose to resurrect. Her biology just refuses to let her go. So Eve's powers are tied directly to her subconscious. Whenever her body breaks, she unconsciously resurrects. This catastrophic death came during the Conquest fight. The second came against Thragg's forces. Each time she comes back different, stronger, more capable. But here's the uncomfortable truth about Eve's arc for most of the series. Her deaths are primarily used as fuel for Mark's rage. She gets destroyed, so he gets angry enough to win. It's only in the later arcs that Eve stops being a plot device and starts being something genuinely extraordinary. Anissa. She was the character the story needed you to hate, and her death was a story trying to figure out what to do with that. Anissa believed in the Viltrumite mission with absolute conviction. To her, consent wasn't a concept that applied across species. Viltrumites operated under different laws, the laws of strength, genetics, and the survival of the Empire. She committed acts that the story never fully recovered from. She assaulted Mark not out of hatred, but out of a warped sense of species obligation. While Thragg broke Mark's body, Anissa broke his sense of safety. She proved that Viltrumite predation wasn't just external warfare, it could come from someone standing right next to you. She died in the final battle against Thragg's forces, fighting on Mark's side. The impact of Anissa's death is that it, narratively, was necessary, and emotionally unresolved at the same time. And that tension was intentional. Her dying in the battle allowed her to exit the story as a soldier of the new empire. It physically removed the source of Mark's unhealed trauma. It just ended the open wound. And sometimes, that's all a chapter can do. Robot. He wasn't wrong, and that is what makes this the most politically uncomfortable death. So Rudy Connors, aka Robot, was arguably the most brilliant character. Born in a deformed body that could not survive outside its tank. Robot took over Earth. Crime dropped. Global conflicts ended. Quality of life measurably improved. His dictatorship was by every statistical measure a success. But he did it through surveillance and control, and the elimination of free will almost. He killed anyone who resisted. He built a world that was safer, smaller, and more controlled, and called it progress. Mark defeated him, and then in a mercy that directly mirrors Nolan's mercy toward Thragg, he let Robot live as a brain in a jar, permanently advising the immortal, unable to act on anything himself. The impact of Robot's death is invincible, asking the most uncomfortable question out loud. What is the right way to protect people? And then admitting it doesn't have a perfect answer. Robot wasn't wrong. Earth was safer under his rule, but safety through the elimination of freedom isn't protection. It's just a cage that looks pretty. Robot was almost right, and almost right in the wrong direction is devastating. This proves how the Invincible story is shaped by deaths. But do you know that Jujutsu Kaisen is shaped by specific promises or binding vows?